What if I told you that one of the largest financial crimes of the 20th century did not happen in a dark alley or at gunpoint or during a daring robbery, but inside quiet office buildings, behind polished doors, executed by bankers in perfectly tailored suits? What if I told you that during World War II, while millions of people died on battlefields and cities were reduced to rubble, one small neutral country became the central financial engine that kept the war economy of Nazi Germany alive? And what if I told you that this country did not do it by accident or under threat of invasion, but knowingly, systematically, and with full awareness that the gold it processed came from occupied nations, destroyed economies, and victims who would never see their wealth again? This is not conspiracy theory. This is not exaggeration. This is a documented financial operation conducted in broad daylight, protected by laws, secrecy, and international diplomacy. It is the story of how Switzerland, a country that claims neutrality as a moral shield, became the world's largest laundromat for stolen gold, enabling a regime that could not have sustained its war effort without foreign currency, international trade, and a discreet financial partner willing to convert looted treasure into spendable wealth. This is the hidden economy behind the war. This is the story of the Swiss gold heist. Why Germany needed gold. By 1939, Nazi Germany had built a massive military machine, but it faced a deadly financial problem. It had almost no access to foreign currency. A modern war could not be financed with speeches, propaganda, or ideology. It required dollars, pounds, and Swiss francs. Without hard currency, Germany could not buy strategic materials such as oil, rubber, metals, or industrial equipment, especially from countries that did not share its political goals. Germany's economy was not designed for long-term war. It relied on internal control, price manipulation, and debt, which meant that as soon as war started, the system began to suffocate. The solution, in the eyes of Nazi financial planners, was simple, cynical, and devastating. Seize gold wherever it could be found, in any form, from any source, and convert it into usable money as quickly as possible. Gold was perfect for this purpose. It was universally accepted, politically neutral, and anonymous. It could be melted, restamped, and traded without revealing its origins. Within weeks of occupying Austria, Poland, Belgium, and the Netherlands, German forces seized national reserves, private vaults, and commercial holdings. Trains filled with bullion left central banks under military guard. Everything that could be carried, melted, or sold was taken. But there was a critical problem. Possessing stolen gold was not the same as spending it. Using it directly would expose the regime, trigger sanctions, and cut Germany off from international markets even faster. Germany needed a neutral country, one that could legally receive gold, convert it discreetly, and return clean currency to the Reich. There were very few options. Only one was perfect. Switzerland. Why Switzerland was ideal. Switzerland was uniquely positioned to become Germany's financial partner. Its banking secrecy laws were among the strictest in the world, making the disclosure of client information a criminal offense. Bank employees could face prison not for stealing money, but for revealing who the money belonged to. The Swiss franc was one of the few stable currencies left in Europe. Most nations devalued or froze their currencies during the Depression and the war, but Switzerland protected its exchange system, allowing it to function as a reliable intermediary for international trade. Geography also mattered. Switzerland shared a long border with Germany, enabling the discreet movement of assets by train, truck, or diplomatic courier. There were no oceans to cross, no ports to inspect, no naval blockades to navigate. Finally, Switzerland had a reputation for neutrality, which created a legal and psychological shield. Transactions with Germany were not seen as collaboration. They were framed as business with a belligerent nation, conducted under the principles of international trade. In reality, Swiss banks knew exactly what they were doing. They did not just accept gold. They melted it, erased origin marks, restamped it with Swiss hallmarks, and returned it to the global market, untraceable and clean. This process turned stolen wealth into spendable capital, and it created a pipeline through which Germany financed its war. The machinery of laundering. To make the operation function at scale, the Reichsbank and Swiss banks developed a system that was precise, fast, and deliberately opaque. Gold arrived in various forms: central bank reserves, corporate holdings, private collections, religious artifacts, and in some cases personal belongings, confiscated from individuals who would never reclaim them. Swiss bankers understood the source of the gold, yet they treated every shipment as a technical procedure rather than a moral question. Once received, the gold was melted, markings erased, and new bars were cast with Swiss identity stamps. This process did two things at once. It destroyed evidence of ownership and created an asset that could legally enter international markets. The key to the system was speed. The faster the gold could be cleaned, the faster Germany could pay for raw materials, industrial equipment, fuel, and weapons. Swiss banks specialized in this efficiency. They were not simply participants. They were architects of a financial pipeline that kept the war economy operating. For every shipment processed, banks collected fees, commissions, and exchanged profits. The business was so lucrative that one internal report described wartime transactions as indispensable to national prosperity. Switzerland did not merely avoid economic downturn during the war, it thrived. And here is something important to understand. The war that ruined most of Europe created the most profitable decade in the modern history of Swiss banking. This is not a metaphor. It is documented economic fact. Financing the war. Once the gold was processed, Swiss banks purchased foreign currency on Germany's behalf, transferred funds to neutral countries, and paid suppliers directly. Many of these transactions were routed through Spain, Portugal, Turkey, and Sweden, nations that sold raw materials and war supplies without officially joining the conflict. The materials financed with laundered gold were critical: Swedish iron ore, Romanian oil, Italian machinery, Portuguese tungsten, Swiss industrial tools. Without them, the German war industry would have collapsed. Tanks cannot move, factories cannot run, and aircraft cannot fly without fuel, metals, and maintenance. And here lies the uncomfortable truth. Every gold bar cleaned in Switzerland translated into bullets, weapons, fuel, and steel used on the battlefield. War is not only fought with soldiers, war is fought with money, and Switzerland supplied the financial oxygen. Before we continue deeper, understand this. These financial systems did not disappear after the war. They evolved. Modern banking secrecy, corporate offshore structures, anonymous ownership, and billion-dollar asset transfers owe their origins to the same logic that operated during the 1940s. If you are new here, this channel uncovers the hidden economic systems behind war, power, and global finance, revealing the mechanisms that are rarely discussed in public. How empires move money, how corporations manipulate markets, how nations hide wealth, how conflicts reshape economies. If you want to follow the next chapters of this story and the hidden histories that shape the modern world, subscribe and join a community that values knowledge over myths. Because the events you're hearing now are only the beginning of a much larger financial architecture that still affects our world today. British and American pressure. By 1943, Allied intelligence had collected enough evidence to prove that Swiss banks were laundering gold taken from occupied nations. Intercepted messages, captured documents, and financial ledgers revealed the scale of the operation. The British government accused Switzerland of prolonging the war by enabling Germany to maintain access to foreign markets. The United States warned that continuing financial cooperation with the Reich would be seen as an act of hostile neutrality. Diplomatic messages grew increasingly direct. Stop accepting German gold. Freeze Reich assets. Halt financial transfers. Switzerland refused. Swiss diplomats argued that the country depended on trade for survival. This was partly true, but internal records revealed a more pragmatic motive. Trade with Germany was extraordinarily profitable, and the banking sector did not want to lose its most valuable client. Neutrality became a political shield, a way to deflect moral responsibility while protecting economic interests. The hidden network of payments Switzerland was not just melting gold and converting it into francs. It was building a sophisticated financial network designed to keep German money invisible. Once the gold was processed, it became part of an intricate global circuit. Swiss francs purchased foreign currency. Foreign currency financed suppliers. Suppliers sent materials to Germany. Germany continued the war. Every step was designed to obscure origin, ownership, and purpose. Swiss banks created layers of financial intermediaries. Companies with neutral-sounding names appeared in Madrid, Lisbon, Stockholm, and Buenos Aires. Transfers moved in small amounts, split across multiple accounts over multiple days to avoid suspicion. In banking reports, these transfers were classified as commodity purchases, even when they directly financed military operations. And because Switzerland controlled the currency conversion, every transaction produced revenue. Financial records show that the Swiss banking sector increased profits by more than 300% during the war. Not through innovation, not through banks expanding internationally, but through the friction of war. A commission taken on every shipment of gold, every exchange of currency, every contract paid. War was bad for most nations, but for one small, neutral country, war became a business model. The post-war reckoning. In 1945, the war ended, but the financial story did not. The Allies demanded that Switzerland return the gold it had received from Germany. They wanted compensation for Belgium, Holland, Poland, and other occupied nations whose reserves had been stolen. Switzerland did not deny receiving the gold. It denied responsibility. Officials argued that banks could not verify origins, that transactions were conducted legally, and that neutrality required equal treatment for all clients. The Allies had evidence. Swiss banks had arguments. Negotiations dragged on. In the end, Switzerland agreed to return a small fraction of what it had received. It paid 250 million Swiss francs, a symbolic settlement intended to close the matter. Historically, this was one of the most profitable bargains ever made. Switzerland kept billions in gold and assets that had been acquired during the war. Assets that would fuel its rise as a global financial center. The scandal that returned 50 years later. For decades, the story remained quiet. Governments moved on. Economies recovered. Banks evolved into multinational giants. But archives do not stay closed forever. In the 1990s, newly released documents revealed evidence of gold laundering, secret accounts belonging to Holocaust victims, and internal memos showing that banks had knowingly destroyed records. This triggered one of the most explosive financial scandals of the century. Lawsuits were filed, governments demanded accountability, survivor groups protested, media outlets uncovered new evidence. Switzerland's reputation for neutrality and security suddenly looked like a mask, one built not only on secrecy, but on silence. In 1998, UBS and Credit Suisse reached a landmark agreement. They paid $1.25 billion to survivors and families. It was one of the largest settlements related to wartime assets in history, but even this amount represented only a fraction of what Switzerland gained during the war. Money is easy to count. Moral debt is harder. The system that survived the war. The story of Swiss gold is not a historical anomaly. It is a blueprint. The systems developed during the war, secrecy, anonymity, currency conversion, offshore intermediaries, became pillars of global finance in the second half of the 20th century. What began as a method to launder stolen assets evolved into the infrastructure of international banking. Shell companies, secret accounts, tax havens, discrete capital flows, sovereign wealth management. Switzerland did not hide from this legacy. It embraced it. By the 1970s, Swiss banks controlled trillions in foreign assets. Ultra-wealthy individuals, corporations, and governments from around the world placed their money in Swiss vaults, trusting the same principles that protected wartime capital. Confidentiality, discretion, legal insulation, political neutrality. The gold of the 1940s became the foundation for the wealth of the 2000s. In the financial world, the past is never dead. It compounds. The moral calculation. Was Switzerland a villain, a survivor, or a strategist? It depends on who answers the question. Allied nations saw a profiteer. Neutral observers saw a realist. Swiss citizens saw economic security. Historians saw an engine that kept a regime alive. There is no single truth, but one fact is unavoidable. Switzerland did not win the war. It won the peace. While Europe rebuilt cities from rubble, Switzerland built skyscrapers from interest payments. While nations healed wounds, Switzerland expanded its banking empire. And while the world debated morality, Switzerland practiced mathematics. War ends. Balance sheets do not. The hidden cost of wealth today, Switzerland is one of the richest, safest, and most stable countries on earth. But prosperity carries memory. The wealth did not appear magically. It was accumulated through decisions, some strategic, some necessary, some deeply uncomfortable. The war forced nations to choose between values and survival. Switzerland chose survival and profit. And those choices reshaped not only a single country, but the global financial system that governs the world today. History does not ask whether decisions were pure. History asks whether they worked. And Switzerland's decisions worked incredibly well. The empire behind the mountain. In the story of World War II, we remember nations that fought and nations that fell. But there were also nations that worked quietly in the shadows, moving money, turning risk into revenue, and transforming chaos into power. Switzerland was one of them, a small country without resources, a neutral state without armies, a silent player without ideology. Yet in the end, it shaped the war more than countries 10 times its size. It did not conquer territory, it conquered markets. It did not build weapons, it built vaults. And in doing so, it created a legacy measured not in battles, but in balance sheets. This is not just the story of stolen gold. It is the story of how war builds wealth, how neutrality mass ambition, and how nations rise not by fighting, but by calculating.